Good morning on this Sunday, March 31st. Here's a look at our top stories on the Georgia gang. Governor Brian Kemp claims a major victory on health care. Even pro-life supporters are coming out against the so-called heartbeat bill. And Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms vetoes a move to investigate her administration. Phil, Alexis, and Theron are all here ready to debate and discuss right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia gang starts now.
This week, Governor Brian Kemp made good on a campaign promise, moving one step closer to providing more Georgians with health care. But we're still months away from hearing final details of the plan.
Our state will reform a broken system with conservative solutions.
Vowing to put patients first, Governor Brian Kemp signed the law that will give him a lot of power to fix the state's healthcare system. His plan is to apply for a Medicaid waiver under Obamacare, which the federal government must approve. The law caps eligibility for any expansion to those at or below the federal poverty level, limiting the number of Georgians who could ultimately be covered. Democrats, though, have been pushing for a full expansion of Medicaid. Governor Kemp said the current Medicaid system costs too much and fails to deliver like it should.
By passing this legislation, we have decided to abandon the status quo. We are rolling up our sleeves, and it is time to get to work.
The deadline to apply for the Medicaid waiver is June 30th of next year, and there's no guarantee the feds will approve the plan. And Theron, I want to start with you because I know Democrats are still fighting for a full Medicaid expansion, but this is a bold move for Governor Kemp. This is something that Governor Deal did not want to touch. But I guess the devil will be in the details when they come out. Absolutely.
And listen, this is a big win for Governor Kemp, but also it's a big win for Georgians, particularly rural and middle-class Georgians who really need this expansion. This is a new phase, sort of first phase into expanding Medicaid in Georgia, but we know that the campaign, Stacey Abrams and Governor Kemp, they talked a lot about Medicaid expansion. What the Democrats are saying, even though this is a big win for Governor Kemp and it was a campaign promise fulfilled, they're saying that this now sort of restores these powers that were taken away back in 2014 back to the governor now, which allows him to pursue this waiver program. Now, some Democrats like Leader Bob Trammell has said, why don't we just go ahead and just fully expand Medicaid in the state? But I think what the governor is pushing back and saying is that, hey, this is a long process. There's a lot of steps towards making sure that we deal with the coverage gap and also sparing the economy. So,
well, I also think they can thank Stacey Abrams for this too, because that was part of her platform, was the full Medicaid expansion, and this is his way of meeting that without doing it completely. So it's a pretty interesting development, I think.
And Phil, I want you to weigh in because this is a big win for Governor Kemp, but talk about the power here. In 2014, they gave power to the governor because they were afraid that the Republicans were afraid that Jason Carter would win and possibly expand Medicaid. Then they took it away from the governor, and now it's back with the governor.
Yeah, that's right. It was a strategic move back then in 2014. Let's remember what these waivers are. Why do you have a waiver? You have a waiver because of the tyrannical and expensive Obamacare. We're trying to get out of these heavy regulations. And yes, you're right. It's an expansion of our insurance health coverage, which is good. And I tend to agree with your analysis there. And I think it's going to help us. We would be bankrupt under Stacey Abrams' Medicaid for all.
No, we wouldn't, because
even Nathan Deal gave the numbers.
The federal government is funding 90% of the expansion.
You know, as we look into the future, and Nathan Deal laid out the case very well, former Governor Deal, we would be bankrupt.
We would not, but well, go ahead.
But the other thing also, to push back a little bit, some Democrats at the Capitol are saying if this phase continues, again, for our viewers, this is just the first phase, and so Governor Kemp is going to continue to work with the legislature to move towards the next phases. But there have been some Democrats, Lori, that said, hey, we're going to pay more and get less coverage, because if you look at the overall plan to expand Medicaid in this sort of phased approach, it could possibly cost more. The other thing that this new law and this new authority, this new bill does is that it also reduces the amount of legislative oversight. Now, Governor Kemp was very clear to say, hey, he's breaking the status quo. He wants to move this forward. So you're going to see ongoing conversations about what legislative oversight will be a part of this expansion program.
We'll have to wait and see how it all shakes out. I want to turn now to the heartbeat bill, the so-called heartbeat bill, which would ban abortions pretty much at 6 weeks. Phil, you had talked about the this, saying that this was a waste for Republicans to focus on. At the time of this taping, it has not received any final approval in the House. But I want to just ask you, it seems like nobody's happy now. We know how the opposition stands, but now some of the pro-life groups have come out and said they're against it because it doesn't go far enough, and they don't want the exceptions written into the law.
That's right. It's as of early Friday morning, it was a mess, and I was trying to see if there was a vote count. I don't know if the votes are there. As we tape, we don't know. And you just talked about exceptions a minute ago. Yes, there's a debate over should you have the exceptions of abortion in the case of if the mother's life is in danger or rape and incest. So
and with that, you have to file a police report.
That's correct. And so I think we've got till April 2nd. That's the end of the legislature. I've been watching this. We all have been watching this over the years. This is not unusual to see jockeying. You're going to see a lot of deals cut right there, and right, Alexis, right, Laura. We've seen it all.
Let's hope this one doesn't get.
So this could be tabled.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that they have the votes? Do you think they'll have the votes?
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I'm going to tell you, Friday morning at the Capitol, you've all week long, Lori and Alexis and Phil, you've seen these protesters. You've seen these men and women, majority women, down there talking about, Planned Parenthood talking points that basically, this will be one of the most restrictive laws in the country if it were to pass. You hear a lot of women talking about that. Most women don't even know that they're even pregnant at 6 weeks. And basically, once a heartbeat is determined, the doctor then basically cuts off the ability for this man and woman, their families, to make a decision whether to make a choice. But I've said this before. I think that at a time when we know that this country is moving towards more of a pro-choice movement, I know Phil disagrees with me on this, but I think that to take away a woman's right to make that choice with her husband or her partner, and to not to be this restrictive, I just think that Georgia really needs to look at this from an economic standpoint, that we're also going back towards some sort of reform.
We did see Hollywood came out against it. Yeah. Some companies are coming out. But Phil, let me ask you, is this a way for Republicans in Georgia to try to get on the map, to really make Georgia's law go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to try to overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, I think they should have waited, because at the end, it's all about Roe v. Wade, the controversial Supreme Court decision that was done in 1973. And what's going to happen is this is going to be decided again in the courts ultimately. I think there'll be a test case somewhere on the heartbeat bill or something else to set it up for the U.S. Supreme Court. Georgia should have just sat back and waited to see a test case rather than even getting into this, in my opinion.
Right. I also think that clearly no one wants to have an abortion. No one. Right. But people do it because of various personal circumstances. And so it's not going to stop people from getting abortions. And then they penalize the woman, penalize the doctors. It's just going to be a grand mess, and they need to just leave it alone.
All right, we'll see. With April 2nd, that's the deadline. We'll see what happens. And coming up, Georgia lawmakers are at major odds over the jet fuel tax and the state takeover of Hartsfield-Jackson. We'll discuss straight ahead.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
This week, the Georgia House made its own changes to the so-called airport takeover bill that passed the Senate with a major tax on jet fuel. And Phil, Republicans in the House and Senate are so far apart on this one. And if you could maybe just explain where we are. It's complicated.
Lori, it is complicated. What happened a week ago is that we put the jet fuel tax exemption for Delta and other airlines, and then you had added, it started to be like a Christmas tree with decorations. You started having other things, including
they call it the Franken-Bill?
The Franken-Bill, that's right. And of course, the big one was the airport takeover that the Senate wants. So I think what's going to happen, again, we talked in the last segment about anything can happen April 2nd, and there's going to be a lot of deals cut. Yes, as of Friday morning, we learned that the House and Senate were in different positions. But remember this, I think that the Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan and the author of the airport state authority bill, Burt Jones, have some cards to play, because both of these vehicles are in the Senate. Jones's bill, as well as the fuel tax, which a lot of the senators don't want, the break for Delta. That's also in the Senate Rules Committee. So
they don't want the break?
A lot of the senators do not want the tax break. That's right. So here's where the deal comes in, Alexis. They're going to have to figure out with Speaker Ralston, can we get some sort of tax break for Delta and the others, and then can we compromise and get some sort of state authority or something over the airport.
But Phil, my question is, Republicans are, the party of no new taxes and not raising taxes, especially on big business, and they're really centering on Delta here. What is the strategy? Why?
Well, the Senate has always actually wanted to raise the tax on Delta. I think that the strategy is Delta. I think we all have agreed on this panel that we have Delta Airlines is a very good airline, basically, and I think the question is we want to make Delta happy, but we also are opposed to the corruption and the bid rigging and the procurement problem at the airport. So even though you have Republicans in control of both chambers, they're trying to weigh what should we do? Like, it's 20 years for the Delta tax exemption. A lot of Republicans feel that's too high. Why not give them 2 or 5 year exemption, but have a sunset?
Well, there's a third element to this, and so for our viewers, let's explain it. So this was a substitute bill that basically, I believe, sort of almost gutted Senate Bill 131. Senator Burt Jones' bill was a Senate takeover bill. In this new substitute, you had 3 elements. You had the fuel tax. You also had an oversight committee, which is totally different than a takeover. So for our viewers, there's 2 different airport bills. But the third element was Chairman Tanner, who we've talked a lot about, who's sort of been the face of transit, along with Chairman Brandon Beach as well. He introduced House Bill 511, which would also deal with transit and ATL, basically who would end up running that. So there's 3 elements to this, and he's actually the one who sort of, took the most questions in the House. But for our viewers, is I want, push back on this narrative that was kind of in some of our publications that, oh, now the airport has been taken over by the state. No, it's a long way to go. Listen, you have until midnight on Tuesday, April 2nd. So what you're going to see now is what is Senator Jones going to do, because this new bill, which is a substitute to his bill, basically kind of removes the whole takeover authority off the table. Now it's this sort of Martok type style oversight committee. And the mayor has come out and basically said, in a very nice and direct way, that that's not something that she's willing to entertain either. And so
why?
Because she can explain that, but I think the thing is that we've seen what's happened with Martok, and nothing against the many House and Senate members who serve on these different committees. But a lot of people feel, and this is not my opinion, but some folks have said the Martok committee basically paved the way for MARTA to kind of go through a lot of back and forth all these years, which essentially
state funding
essentially led to the ATL, right? And so I think her main thing that she said publicly was that it's just not needed. And so the one thing that's going to happen now is that now this House bill, which passed on the floor on Thursday, now goes to the Senate for debate. So now the Senator Jones and others have a decision. Do you push for the takeover, or do you support the oversight? But then you got Delta fuel tax and
everything else
and everything in there. And
right.
so if that bill fails, and all 3 of those fail, and if it passes, then you got to move it back over to the House for more debate.
And that's right. You also remember that bills that don't make it on April 2nd can still be alive and come over to the next session. So if they can't get compromise, and you're right, that transit piece is actually pretty controversial just on its own, with the DOT in contention with lawmakers, which is a very rare thing to see.
But Alexis, let me ask you this question, because a lot of folks out there would say, why would the mayor be against just oversight? And we know that Hartsfield-Jackson is one of the best airports really in the world. It's run efficiently, it's run really well. So I don't think that that's where the takeover needs to be. It's obviously there needs to be some oversight or some more transparency with the procurement process.
Well, then the Martok or the Oversight Committee would not do that necessarily. That would be operations versus procurement. So I think it's not needed in that area. The other thing is, I think that even if they do pass something, it still has to get past the FAA, and in North Carolina, they didn't approve it. So it's just, and plus it'll end up in court anyway. It won't happen overnight.
And for our viewers, the way that this oversight committee is currently written, Lori, it's not just Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport.
It's all airports in the state.
It's 10 commercial airports. And so you saw mayors from Macon, Hardy Davis from Augusta, you saw the mayor of Savannah. All these folks started saying, hold on, don't start giving us oversight because you want to deal with the procurement situation at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, but to Lexi's point, it's more operational. So I think Republicans are going to have to make a choice. Is the operational department the problem with the airport, or is it procurement, right? Because if you look at Burt Jones's message, it's been procurement, 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 but now with this new oversight, it's more operational, and it now expands throughout the state. So it's a lot of messaging.
No, you're right. And Burt Jones and Lieutenant Governor, I think, are more concerned about procurement, and the House is more concerned, as you point out, the other way. So, but I do think this. I think Governor Kemp, now we hadn't talked about it, he is a factor in this too. He wants the Delta fuel tax exemption. So maybe the governor is going to step in by April 2nd and try to get a compromise.
April 2nd is that key date. I don't know if we'll get time to talk about the hate crimes bill, but it looks like that one is on stall. Also, the Georgia medical marijuana cultivation bill is hitting some snags. So, but straight ahead, we move to Atlanta city politics. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms' message to City Council.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms vetoed a move by Atlanta City Council to investigate her administration. This is about an AJC report that found some of her campaign staff got paid with taxpayer dollars even before the mayor took office. Theron, this doesn't seem to jive with Mayor Bottoms' pledge about transparency. So I want to ask you, why the move? Why did she come out and say no and veto it when it looks like the investigation could go on anyway?
Well, you're exactly right. You actually just cemented my point. The investigation had already begun. And so really this resolution was just not needed. It was really sort of a political move that gave council cover to basically be able to say to their constituencies, hey, we want to pass this resolution. But the minute that this was basically risen to the top levels of city government, the ethics and the audit office already started investigating. I mean, it was well underway. So the reason the mayor vetoed the bill is to not stall the actual investigation that was underway. The other thing that was in the resolution that was so important for our viewers to know is that it called for outside attorneys to come in. So what you would do is you would now bring in additional attorneys,
additional taxpayer money
on top of what the audit and ethics committee is already investigating with attorneys that were selected by the city attorney's office. And so this was the right move for her to veto this, because it would have basically stopped the ongoing investigation that was already underway, and it would have added more money and more bureaucracy to this process.
But wasn't this her chance to get out in front and say, you know what, I welcome any investigation, I am transparent, I've really worked on transparency?
Laura, I think we've talked about this a long time. You have not seen any, this mayor has been the most transparent mayor in our country. You got an open checkbook, you got an oversight committee that she's already put in place. She has a transparency officer in her office. Those are just 3 things on the long list that I can go through about transparency with this mayor.
Well, that's a good spin, but why doesn't she just say, and I think people would appreciate the honesty, that I made a mistake when these people were originally put in place. One of her campaign manager was foolishly put as a deputy airport manager. They did the salaries and the names for a job position. I get where you kind of want your own team, but just say you made a mistake. And I'm not opposed, and I don't think any of us should be opposed to some outside lawyers looking in. Council does have the right to do that, especially if it doesn't pass the smell test.
Well, they have the right after the investigation is done, but not to bring in, they have the right to do it, I suppose, but the mayor doesn't think they should.
They can do it any time they want.
Well, yes, but the mayor doesn't think we need to have that expense because of what's already ongoing.
She didn't want the outside opinion.
No, that's not true. I don't know that, but you don't either. So
sure.
I think that, I just think that she thinks we should follow the normal steps. And the other problem that happened was it was not her administration that did this, because it happened before she even took office. So it warrants looking at the prior administration as opposed to hers.
And I think a fair criticism, Phil, is that these decisions that were made to place these workers, which were people who were brought over to help transition the government when they only had less than 3 weeks to transition the government, when you had an inaugural event coming up that Monday and she took office. As Alexis is pointing out, these were people who didn't even work for her.
You once told this audience repeatedly that Keisha Lance Bottoms and former Mayor Reed were this tight and this close, and they were allied.
No.
She knew what was going on.
You're mistaking me for someone else who used to be in this.
What was going on.
I also go back to my point that every candidate who wins has this transition.
Yes,
Well,
and normally they have like 2 months to do something.
One of the things we like to do on the show is that we like to
runoff.
break news. I'm going to break a little news to our viewers. Stay tuned. There's in the works an administrative paper to basically make sure the next mayor of Atlanta, the 61st mayor of Atlanta, and I want to be clear, the mayor is going to run for re-election, so she's not going to run for election. But whenever that next mayor, he or she comes in, there's an administrative paper in the works that's going to be presented to council to make sure that there's a fair and proper, clear process of when someone is elected and you have opponents who take 2 weeks to basically make up all the stuff about why they're going to probably contest the election. That person, he or she, will have a laid out process that council
So are
will
you
approve.
admitting that it was an improper
No,
process?
I said this last week. I think
Sounds
the
like you
mayor,
are.
I think, no, let me be very clear.
There was no process.
The mayor, I believe, did nothing wrong. With the information that she knew at the time, which she requested from the previous administration and what they did, I don't believe the mayor did anything wrong. But I think there's an ongoing investigation that's let the facts come out.
She shouldn't have used taxpayer money to plug these
She
people
didn't
in.
do it.
All right, speaking of taxpayer money, I want to move on. A really important issue, there's still no deal on hurricane relief for Georgia farmers. Senator Isaacson and Senator David Perdue have been working on this. It looked like it was getting close. They were getting very close to a deal, but still nothing. And the issue now is Democrats want more money for Puerto Rico, Phil.
That's outrageous. They've already given billions to Puerto Rico, and they haven't spent half of the money. So, there are some Democrats who now agree with Senators Perdue and Isaacson that, you know, we've got to help people in Georgia and other affected areas. I think this Puerto Rico thing has gotten way out of hand. I call on the Democrats to do the right thing and help devastated South Georgia.
All right.
Yeah. No, I've got nothing to add.
Okay, all right. Well, coming up, we will have winners and losers.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
This week, I want to start with Alexis because I know you want to make Mayor Bottoms a winner because she's opening the missing and murdered children's cases, and you have a history because of your coverage of the cases.
Absolutely. I think she's a mayor. It's a winner. The mayor is a winner for doing this because it was such a horrific time in the city's history. And to reopen the cases, to take technology, the new technology that's now available, to look at evidence that that was there that may not have been able to be tested in such a way, could bring some new insight, because as most people know, and maybe some don't, that Wayne Williams was convicted of 2 murders out of the 30 plus.
2 adult murders.
2 adult murders,
right.
Nothing to do with the children. And so that has left a lot of people with open wounds, and it was a terrifying time in our history. I had a child who was the age of the profile of the children who were being kidnapped and killed. And it was a terrible time in our history, and I think this will do a lot of healing for those who've not been able to close their cases on this, and it's a very good thing that the mayors did.
I think we all agree it's a good move. Phil,
agree.
your winners and losers.
Let me start with my
you have a
winner,
prop.
President Trump. And the loser is the mainstream media. You know, look at the headline. I'm sure the liberal headline writers choked by putting no Russia collusion on that. And you know, but I think the winner is the American people, and because we cannot have any president, I don't care if they're a Democrat or Republican, being the victim of corrupt people. Yeah, corrupt people in the FBI or the Justice Department that try to overturn the people's will during an election. No president should understand that. But I think the real losers are the news media, because the fake news that went on and reporting on a fake dossier, there should have been a better journalistic integrity. I've got another winner, David Amati. He's the new executive director of our State Ethics Commission. You know, they had problems there. They had to get rid of the old one. And boy, the Braves lost. Loser. It's in their opener.
All right, we've got a lot of time, Theron, so I'm going to give you more time.
Oh, wow. Well, I just want to echo Alexis. I think that this is a wonderful move for the mayor to really reopen this investigation. I remember as a young kid growing up in Athens, watching the TV, all the stuff that was going on, where my mom would not let me go outside and play as long because parents were just terrified. And if you just look at the emotion from the people who spoke at the press conference, folks who are just talking about how they want to make sure that there's some closure, I think this is a really good move for her. I also want to recognize Vicky Morrow and the National Black Arts Festival. They held their Fine Arts and Fashion event, and I know you've been many times, Alexis.
Yes.
This is my first time going, and it was great. And so they're giving back to a lot of college students, particularly African American artists that are really focusing on art. And then lastly, my other winner is going to be the Boys and Girls Club of West Georgia and Chambers County, who recently received the League of Eagles Award from the Boys and Girls Club of America. And so it's somebody who is a beneficiary of all the great work that the Boys and Girls Club of America do all across the country. I want to make them my winner this week as well.
Very nice. All right, thank you all. There's a lot of you on Facebook just weighing in on winners and losers. So a lot of President Trump winners and losers. Michael Henry said President Trump was a winner in his book. Matthew Ryan said loser was Cook County, Illinois over the Jussie Smollett case. And Jennifer Johnson said it was Adam Schiff was the loser. So very interesting to hear from you all on Facebook. And thank you all so much for watching this week. We will see you next week right here on the Georgia Gang.
I have to start getting my folk to go to Facebook.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.